It began with a closed-door exchange inside Kensington Palace, one so tightly controlled that even senior aides were shut out. But when Prince William emerged, his expression was unmistakably hardened. Moments later, Prince Harry was summoned. Something had surfaced, something tied to Meghan Markle, and it threatened to fracture what little trust remained between the brothers. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The briefing itself, according to those who quietly observed its aftermath, was unlike anything Kensington Palace had hosted in recent memory. It wasn't ceremonial, nor was it routine. It was urgent, deliberate, and cloaked in an unusual level of secrecy that instantly raised questions among even the most seasoned insiders. Senior advisors had been called in discreetly, their arrivals staggered, their movements carefully managed to avoid attention. Reports suggest that what unfolded inside that room was not simply an exchange of information, but the unveiling of something far more consequential, a detail, or perhaps a pattern, that had been overlooked until now, and once revealed, could no longer be ignored. What stood out most, however, was the transformation in William's demeanor. Those familiar with his typically composed and measured presence described a shift that was impossible to miss. He was no longer the calm, diplomatic heir navigating delicate family dynamics. Instead, insiders whisper that he appeared resolute, even steely, as though a line had been crossed that could not be redrawn. That shift alone sent quiet shockwaves through the palace corridors. Because if William, known for restraint, had reached that point, then whatever he had learned carried weight, serious, undeniable weight. And at the center of it all, according to multiple interpretations, was Meghan. The nature of the alleged arrangement remains layered in ambiguity, but its impact was immediate. Palace staff were reportedly instructed to keep discussions tightly contained, an unusual directive that only deepened the sense of gravity surrounding the situation. Conversations that might once have unfolded casually among aides were suddenly cut short, replaced by cautious glances and carefully chosen words. It was as if an invisible boundary had been drawn, and everyone within the institution instinctively understood the risk of crossing it. This level of information control is rarely implemented without reason, and its presence here suggested that the matter at hand extended beyond a simple misunderstanding. Then came the moment that would define the day. Harry was called in not for a scheduled engagement, not for a routine discussion, but for something far more direct. The urgency of the summons alone hinted at the seriousness of the situation. Observers note that tensions between the brothers had been quietly building for months, shaped by distance, differing priorities, and a growing divide in how they viewed both family and duty. But this was different. This was immediate. This was personal. And as Harry stepped into that private space, whatever remained of their fragile equilibrium seemed poised on the edge of collapse. Early whispers suggest that the issue at the heart of this confrontation revolved around who held it, who had broken it, and whether it could ever be restored. There are also murmurs of influence, of decisions made behind closed doors, of negotiations that may have unfolded without full transparency. None of it confirmed, all of it impossible to ignore. Because in a structure as carefully balanced as the royal institution, even the perception of undisclosed agreements can carry profound consequences. And for William, who has increasingly positioned himself as a guardian of continuity, the implications were impossible to dismiss. As the hours passed, the atmosphere within Kensington Palace remained tense, almost suspended. No official statements were issued, no clarifications offered. Instead, there was silence, deliberate, controlled, and, perhaps most tellingly, incomplete. Because silence, in moments like this, rarely signals resolution. More often, it marks the beginning of something deeper, something still unfolding beneath the surface. But what William uncovered wasn't just another disagreement, it pointed to a hidden agreement that had been quietly shaping royal dynamics behind the scenes. Long before the confrontation, a quiet agreement had allegedly been forming, one that, according to insiders, gave Meghan Markle influence far beyond what the public ever saw. It did not emerge suddenly, nor did it arrive with fanfare. Instead, it took shape in fragments, private conversations, carefully timed decisions, and subtle shifts in direction that, when viewed in isolation, seemed insignificant. But together, they painted a far more complex picture. Reports suggest that behind the carefully managed public narrative, Meghan had been engaging in discussions that extended beyond immediate royal duties, touching on future positioning, long-term influence, and a vision that may not have fully aligned with the expectations of the institution she had married into. At first, these developments were easy to overlook. The royal household, by its very nature, operates within layers of discretion, where conversations are often held behind closed doors and intentions are rarely spelled out in full. But this felt different. Insiders whisper that certain interactions once considered routine began to carry a new weight, a sense that they were part of something larger, something not entirely visible to those outside a select inner circle. The alleged arrangement, described by some as a strategic understanding, may have involved external partnerships or influence networks, blurring the already delicate line between royal responsibility and personal autonomy, and in a system built on tradition and clearly defined roles. Even the suggestion of such a shift was enough to raise concern. What made the situation more unsettling was the question of awareness. Palace insiders claim that the arrangement, whatever its full scope, was not formally disclosed to senior members of the royal family. This absence of transparency became a focal point of unease, because within the monarchy, where hierarchy and communication are tightly structured, the idea that something of this magnitude could develop without full acknowledgement challenged the very framework that holds it together. And as these whispers gained traction, attention inevitably turned to timing. The origins of this alleged deal appeared to trace back to a period when relations within the royal household were already under strain, when differences in perspective were becoming harder to reconcile, and when the balance between personal ambition and institutional duty was increasingly fragile. It is within this context that the deeper questions began to surface. Who, if anyone, had authorized such an arrangement? Was it an informal understanding that evolved over time, or something more deliberate, more calculated? And perhaps most critically, why was it concealed? These were not questions with easy answers, and that uncertainty only intensified the sense of unease surrounding the situation. Because in the absence of clarity, speculation fills the void, and in a structure as visible as the monarchy, speculation can be as powerful as truth. For Prince William, the discovery of these details reportedly came not through direct channels, but through fragments, secondary information, indirect confirmations, pieces that had to be assembled rather than presented. That alone was enough to shift his perspective. Being blindsided was not just a matter of personal frustration. It signaled a breakdown in the very communication channels that are meant to prevent such situations from arising. And as those fragments came together, the implications became harder to ignore. This was no longer about isolated decisions or misunderstandings. It was about control, who held it, how it was exercised, and whether it had been quietly redirected without full consent. The more the picture sharpened, the more it pointed toward a broader tension within the royal framework itself. Questions of image, influence, and legacy began to intertwine, creating a narrative that extended beyond any single individual. Because at its core, the monarchy is not just about public appearances, it is about continuity, about maintaining a carefully balanced structure that has endured for generations. And anything that threatens that balance, even subtly, carries consequences that ripple outward in ways that are often impossible to predict. As these details became clearer, the emotional weight of the situation intensified. What may have started as quiet concern evolved into something far more decisive. For William, the shift was unmistakable. Concern gave way to resolve, and resolve, in turn, set the stage for action. Because once the possibility of a hidden agreement had been acknowledged, it could no longer be ignored. And with each new piece of information, the path forward became less about questioning and more about confronting. As the details became clearer, William's reaction shifted from concern to resolve, and the stage was set for a direct confrontation. The meeting between Prince William and Prince Harry was never meant to escalate, but within minutes, it became one of the most strained exchanges the palace had seen in years. What began as an urgent but controlled conversation quickly unraveled into something far more volatile, charged with the weight of years of unspoken grievances and recent revelations that neither side could ignore. The urgency of the meeting itself set the tone. This was not a scheduled discussion or a routine check-in. It was immediate, deliberate, and, as insiders suggest, unavoidable. Because once the details surrounding the alleged arrangement linked to Meghan Markle had surfaced, silence was no longer an option. Reports describe a conversation that shifted rapidly from restrained inquiry to emotional intensity. At first, there were questions direct, pointed, and impossible to deflect. William, according to those familiar with the dynamics of the exchange, sought clarity, not just about the existence of the alleged deal, but about Harry's awareness of it, his involvement, and, perhaps most importantly, his intent. But clarity did not come easily. Instead, the conversation reportedly became layered with frustration, as answers seemed to raise more questions than they resolved. And with each passing moment, the tension grew, tightening like a thread stretched too far. It is in this space that the emotional core of the confrontation began to emerge. William's concerns were not framed as abstract institutional issues, they were personal, rooted in a sense of responsibility, not only to the monarchy but to the legacy he is expected to uphold. For him, the idea that something of this magnitude could unfold without transparency was not just troubling, it was unacceptable. And that conviction, sharpened by the way he had learned of the situation, gave his words a force that could not be softened. On the other side, Harry's response carried its own intensity. He did not retreat. Instead, he defended Meghan firmly and without hesitation, challenging what he appeared to see as a narrative shaped by suspicion rather than understanding. What followed, according to various interpretations, was a clash not just of perspectives, but of principles. William spoke from a place of duty, an unwavering belief in the structures and expectations that define royal life. Harry, in contrast, seemed to speak from a place of personal allegiance, prioritizing his role as a husband over the demands of the institution. Neither position was new, but in this moment, they collided with a force that neither could fully contain. And as the conversation intensified, the past began to resurface. Old tensions, once managed or set aside, returned with renewed urgency, questions of trust, of loyalty, of decisions that had led them to this point. Observers suggest that voices were raised, though the exact words remain undisclosed. What is clear, however, is that the exchange crossed a threshold. This was no longer a disagreement that could be quietly resolved behind palace walls. It had become something deeper, something more defining, because at its heart, the confrontation exposed a divide that had been growing for years, a divide between two brothers who once stood side by side, now facing each other from fundamentally different positions. And within that divide lay a broader tension, one that extended beyond personal relationships into the very identity of the monarchy itself. Even as the meeting unfolded, efforts were made to contain its impact. Staff were reportedly instructed to maintain strict confidentiality, a directive that underscored the sensitivity of the situation. No details were to be shared, no interpretations offered. But containment, in moments like this, is never absolute. Because while words can be controlled, the consequences of those words cannot. And as the meeting drew to a close, whatever fragile understanding had once existed between William and Harry appeared more uncertain than ever. Yet the significance of this confrontation did not lie solely in what was said, but in what it revealed. It exposed fractures that could no longer be ignored, tensions that could no longer be dismissed as temporary. And perhaps most importantly, it signaled that the choices made in this moment would carry forward, shaping not just their relationship, but the future of the institution they both remain connected to, whether in unity or in distance. But the confrontation wasn't just about the past, it carried consequences that could reshape the monarchy's future. Behind the scenes, the palace machinery moved swiftly, quietly activating measures designed to contain what insiders were now calling a serious internal breach. The confrontation between Prince William and Prince Harry had not simply ended with raised voices and unresolved tension, it had triggered something far more calculated, far more deliberate. Because within the royal institution, moments of crisis are never left to unfold unchecked. They are studied, contained, and when necessary, strategically managed. And this, by all accounts, was one of those moments. Senior advisors were reportedly convened with unusual urgency, their discussions centered not on personalities, but on implications. The alleged arrangement linked to Meghan Markle was no longer viewed as an isolated concern. It had become a matter of institutional significance, raising questions about protocol, authority, and the boundaries of influence. Insiders suggest that the tone of these meetings was measured but unmistakably serious. Because if there had indeed been a lapse in transparency, it was not just a personal misstep, it was a structural vulnerability. and vulnerabilities within a system built on continuity and control cannot be ignored. Almost immediately, scrutiny intensified. External engagements, once handled with a degree of flexibility, were now subject to closer examination. Communications, both formal and informal, were reviewed with heightened attention, as if searching for patterns that might confirm or clarify what had already begun to surface. This was not about assigning blame, at least not outwardly. It was about understanding the scope of the issue, mapping its reach, and ensuring that no further surprises lay hidden beneath the surface. Because in an environment where perception holds as much weight as reality, even the possibility of undisclosed arrangements carries risks that extend far beyond the individuals involved. At the same time, efforts to control the narrative became increasingly apparent. The palace, known for its careful management of public information, appeared to tighten its grip even further. Statements were measured, limited, and, in some cases, deliberately absent. Insiders whisper that this was not hesitation, it was strategy. Because revealing too much, too soon, could amplify speculation, while saying too little might invite it. It was a delicate balance, one that required precision and restraint. And yet, despite these efforts, the sense that something significant had occurred could not be entirely contained. Internally, reviews were reportedly initiated to examine adherence to protocol and the clarity of decision-making authority. These reviews, while framed as routine assessments, carried an unmistakable undertone. They were not just about understanding what had happened, but about ensuring that it could not happen again. And within this process, William's role began to shift. Observers note that he appeared more assertive, more directly involved in the institutional response. This was not the quiet, supportive presence he had maintained in the past. This was something more active, more defined, a reflection, perhaps, of the responsibility he increasingly carries as the future of the monarchy. As these internal mechanisms moved into place, subtle changes in the dynamics between royal factions began to emerge. Distancing, once informal and understated, became more visible. Interactions that had previously appeared coordinated now seemed more measured, more deliberate. It was not an open divide, not yet, but it was enough to be noticed. Enough to suggest that the effects of the confrontation were extending beyond the private sphere and into the broader structure of the royal household. And outside the palace walls, the response was immediate. Media speculation intensified, fueled not by confirmed details, but by the very absence of them. Analysts, commentators, and observers began to piece together fragments, attempting to construct a narrative from what little information was available. And in doing so, they amplified the sense that something significant was unfolding, something that the palace was working hard to contain, but could not fully conceal. Yet even as the palace tightened control, the ripple effects of the revelation were already spreading beyond its walls. What began as a private dispute quickly evolved into a broader fracture, one that insiders say could have lasting consequences for the royal family's unity. The tension that had once been confined to closed rooms and carefully managed conversations was now impossible to fully contain. It spread quietly at first, almost imperceptibly, but then with growing clarity, revealing a divide that extended beyond a single confrontation. On one side stood Prince William, increasingly surrounded by those who aligned with his vision of structure, continuity, and duty. On the other stood Prince Harry, firmly rooted in a different perspective, one shaped by personal loyalty and an unwavering defense of Meghan Markle. And between them, the space that once held shared purpose now felt strained, uncertain, and deeply divided. This growing distance did not announce itself openly. Instead, it revealed itself in subtle but unmistakable ways. Public appearances, once seamless displays of unity, began to carry an undercurrent of scrutiny. Every interaction, every absence, every carefully timed statement became a point of analysis. Observers searched for meaning in the smallest details, questioning whether a glance, a pause, or even a scheduling decision signaled tension or the possibility of reconciliation. Because in a family where symbolism holds immense power, even silence can speak volumes. And in this case, silence seemed to say more than words ever could. Behind the scenes, reports of reduced communication between the brothers began to surface. Conversations that might once have been direct and frequent were now described as limited, measured, or, in some interpretations, almost non-existent. This shift was not just a matter of personal distance, it reflected a deeper breakdown in trust. Because communication, within the royal framework, is not simply about maintaining relationships, it is about ensuring alignment, preserving stability, and preventing exactly the kind of uncertainty that was now unfolding. And without it, the divide only widened, becoming more difficult to bridge with each passing day. At the center of much of this scrutiny remained Meghan. Her role, already complex and often debated, became even more central as questions surrounding the alleged arrangement continued to circulate. Insiders suggest that she was viewed not only as a participant in the unfolding situation, but as a key influence shaping its direction. This perception, whether accurate or not, intensified the focus on her actions, her intentions, and the extent of her involvement. And as that focus grew, so too did the narrative surrounding her, one that placed her at the heart of a conflict that was no longer contained within the private sphere. Outside the palace, the response was immediate and unrelenting. Royal watchers, commentators, and media outlets began to dissect every development, offering interpretations that ranged from cautious speculation to bold assertion. The lack of official clarity only fueled this process, allowing narratives to form and evolve without direct confirmation or denial. And as these narratives gained traction, they began to shape public perception, influencing how the situation was understood far beyond the walls of the institution itself. What had once been an internal matter was now part of a much larger conversation, one that the palace could guide but not fully control. With each passing moment, the pressure on the monarchy's image of unity intensified. The royal family has long been seen as a symbol of continuity, stability, and collective purpose. But this situation challenged that perception, introducing a sense of division that could not easily be dismissed. Questions began to emerge not just about the immediate conflict, but about its long-term implications. Could trust be rebuilt? Could collaboration be restored? Or had something more permanent taken hold? Something that would continue to shape the dynamics of the royal family for years to come? Because beneath the surface of public speculation lies a deeper uncertainty, one that cannot be resolved through statements or appearances alone. It is an uncertainty rooted in the very foundation of the institution, its ability to adapt, to endure, and to maintain cohesion in the face of internal challenges. And as this fracture continues to unfold, it raises a question that extends far beyond the present moment, reaching into the future of the monarchy itself. But beneath the public speculation lies a deeper question: what does this mean for the future of the royal legacy? At its core, this conflict isn't just personal, it's about the direction of an institution built on tradition, duty, and carefully guarded legacy. What has unfolded between Prince William and Prince Harry is no longer confined to emotion or disagreement. It has evolved into something far more consequential, a defining moment that forces a question the monarchy has faced time and again: how does it preserve its identity while adapting to a changing world? Because beneath the surface of every raised voice and every fractured exchange lies a deeper struggle, one that touches the very foundation of what the royal family represents. William's position within this struggle has become increasingly clear. He is not simply reacting to events, he is stepping into a role that demands protection of continuity, of structure, of the unwritten rules that have sustained the monarchy for generations. Insiders suggest that his response is shaped not just by personal feeling, but by a sense of obligation that extends far beyond himself. To him, the institution is not flexible by design, it is deliberate, measured, and rooted in a framework that cannot be easily altered without consequence. And so, when faced with the possibility of undisclosed arrangements or shifting dynamics, his instinct is not to accommodate, but to reinforce, to ensure that the boundaries remain intact. In contrast, Harry's path reflects a different philosophy, one that places greater emphasis on independence and personal agency. Alongside Meghan Markle, he appears to embody a vision of royal life that is less constrained by tradition and more aligned with modern expectations. This approach, while resonating with some, introduces a tension that is difficult to reconcile within an institution built on continuity. Because every deviation from established protocol, every move toward autonomy, raises questions about precedent. And precedent, within the monarchy, is not a minor concern, it is the very mechanism through which stability is maintained. This is where the conflict deepens. It is no longer just about what has happened, but about what it represents. The idea that an undisclosed agreement could exist whether fully understood or not challenges the expectation of transparency within the royal framework. It suggests that decisions may be made outside the established channels, that influence may be exercised in ways that are not fully visible. And if that possibility is allowed to stand, even implicitly, it risks altering the balance that has long defined the institution. Because once precedent is set, it does not remain isolated. It echoes, shaping future actions and expectations in ways that are often difficult to control. Trust, in this context, becomes more than a personal matter, it becomes structural. The monarchy relies on a network of relationships that function not just on loyalty, but on clarity and shared understanding. When that clarity is disrupted, the effects ripple outward, creating uncertainty that extends beyond any single interaction. And in a system where perception is inseparable from reality, that uncertainty can have lasting consequences. It can influence how the institution is viewed, how its decisions are interpreted, and ultimately, how its authority is perceived by those who observe it from the outside. Public perception, already shaped by years of scrutiny and evolving expectations, now faces another layer of complexity. The contrast between tradition and transformation is no longer abstract, it is visible, tangible, and unfolding in real time. Some see this as a necessary evolution, a sign that the monarchy must adapt to remain relevant. Others view it as a risk, a departure from the very principles that have allowed it to endure. And within that divide lies a broader question, one that extends far beyond the immediate conflict. What kind of institution will the monarchy become in the years ahead? History offers no simple answers, but it does provide context. The royal family has faced internal divisions before, moments when personal choices collided with institutional expectations. Each time, the outcome has shaped not just the individuals involved, but the trajectory of the monarchy itself. And while the details may differ, the underlying tension remains strikingly familiar, a struggle between duty and desire, between preservation and change. And as history has shown, such moments rarely end quietly. After the confrontation, an unusual silence settled over the palace, one that insiders describe as calculated, not accidental. It was not the kind of silence that follows resolution, nor the quiet that signals peace. This was something heavier, more deliberate, as though every word not spoken carried just as much meaning as those that had already been exchanged. In the days that followed, the absence of visible interaction between Prince William and Prince Harry became impossible to ignore. No joint appearances, no shared statements, no subtle gestures of unity that might reassure those watching closely. Instead, there was distance measured, controlled, and unmistakably intentional. Palace communications, always carefully managed, seemed to narrow even further. Statements were shorter, more precise, and often avoided altogether when the subject edged too close to the unfolding situation. Insiders whisper that this was not a sign of uncertainty, but of strategy. Because in moments of internal strain, the monarchy has long relied on silence as a tool not to conceal, but to contain. Every word released carries weight, and in this case, the risk of saying too much appeared greater than the risk of saying nothing at all. Yet that restraint came with its own consequences, creating a void that others were quick to fill. Outside the palace, speculation intensified. Without official clarity, narratives began to take shape, each interpretation adding another layer to an already complex situation. Royal watchers analyzed timelines, compared appearances, and scrutinized even the smallest shifts in behavior. The lack of confirmation did not slow the conversation, it accelerated it. Because silence, in the public sphere, rarely dampens curiosity, it fuels it. And as the speculation grew, so too did the sense that something unresolved lingered beneath the surface, something that had not yet reached its conclusion. Within the institution, however, the pause appeared purposeful. Insiders suggest that this period of quiet was being used to reassess, to evaluate not just what had happened, but how it should be addressed moving forward. This was not simply about managing a moment, it was about shaping the response to it. Every option carried implications, every decision the potential to either stabilize or further complicate an already fragile situation. And so, rather than rushing toward resolution, the palace seemed to hold its position, allowing time to reveal what immediate action could not. Even in the absence of direct communication, subtle signals began to emerge.